Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Amol Padwad. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. It is an initiative using the rise in online professional development to connect people from around the world with opportunities which they may not have had due to old normal of face-to-face conferences. And we are celebrating International Mother Language Day webinar series that aims to celebrate linguistic diversity and multilingualism. We intend to promote awareness of equity and inclusion in education through discussions about linguistic human rights, importance of mother tongues, and other concerns about language. And let me read out the extract from Dr. Amol, Language Diversity in the English Classroom Issues and Concerns. Linguistically diverse classrooms are a norm rather than a deviation in many and particularly Asian contexts. The language diversity characterizing in English classroom is a crucial consideration of the teaching and learning of English in these contexts. Moving away from the English-only position of the past based on a neglect of classroom language diversity, and now the diversity is to be seen as a resource actively recognized and used in the teaching or learning of English. However, there are several conceptual, practical, and pragmatic aspects of classroom language diversity which have an important bearing on how the diversity is understood, recognized, and employed productively. This session will look at some issues related to these aspects and attempt to present some pedagogical concerns resulting therefrom. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Amol Padwad for this webinar. Dr. Amol Padwad is currently Professor and Director, Center for English Language Education, Ambedkar University, Delhi, and has 35 years of experience of teaching, training, and research experience. He is the Secretary Annate Association of English Teachers, besides being a former National President of English Language Teachers Association of India, LTI. He has been an ELT trainer and consultant for various government and non-government agencies and has successfully managed several ELT projects. He pioneered English Teachers Club, a self-help teacher development group in several rural towns of central India, which continue to significantly contribute to teachers' professional development. His key publications include a Teacher's Handbook on CPD with Rod Boleto, Continuing Professional Development Lessons from India with Rod Boleto, Teaching in Low Resource Classrooms, Voices of Experience with Richard Smith and Deborah, and Research in English Language Education in Indian Universities Directory. We are pleased to have you, Dr. Padwad. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinar.
Thank you very much, Amanullah, and it's my great pleasure to be here at this event or this webinar. And I'm also delighted to be a part of this series you are conducting to commemorate the Mother Language Day. Good afternoon. It's around 2:30 in India, but also good morning, good evening, and appropriate greetings to different times of the places from where people have joined today. I could see there is a whole spectrum of people all the way from Croatia to Malaysia. So I'm delighted to meet such an international audience here.
We have people from Lima, Peru.
Sorry?
We have people from Lima, Peru, Indonesia,
Canada,
yeah, India, Mexico.
I saw that. That's fantastic, fantastic. Quite a diverse group and very much in keeping with the spirit of this series. Before I start, I just would like to apologize in advance. My house is bang on a busy street, so occasionally you might hear some traffic noise in the background. But if there are problems in hearing, just let me know. I'll try to do something about it. Right. So sure. Just give me a second. Let me share my screen. Right. I hope you are all able to see my screen now. Can someone
confirm?
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. So as mentioned earlier by Manula, and thanks for that generous introduction. Uh, I would like to look at the English classroom in particular and the issues of language diversity that teachers of English come across in their classrooms. It is such a happy coincidence that today is the day of my own mother tongue, Marathi, which is the state language of the state of Maharashtra in central India. So it's my mother tongue day today, and we celebrate it as the Marathi language day. And I got this chance to be talking about this issue on this day. So for me, this is a very happy coincidence. What I propose to do today is very simple. I would like to focus particularly on multilingualism, not look at language diversity in general, because I believe that this is one crucial area which has a direct bearing on our job as teachers of English. So there will be two broad parts of what I'm going to discuss today. Firstly, to present some issues in the very notion, very conceptualization of multilingualism. And secondly, some pedagogic concerns, which I believe emerge from the issues of multilingualism. I must also apologize and also warn you that nearly all the examples and data and illustrations that I will be using are from India. Not only because those are the things I am familiar with, but also because I believe I have the right to speak about them because of my experience and not about other contexts. So there will be a lot of things which may resonate with you. You will find lots of points similar to your own context, but still I cannot take the risk of generalizing from one context. I hope there would be interesting ideas and insights from India too. And in the end, I propose to suggest a couple of discussion prompts. Some prompts which I believe will stimulate some discussion, some thinking. However, uh, it depends on time, whether time permits and if the moderator is happy with that. And of course, I would love to keep some time in the end for questions and answers or even sharing of ideas and experiences. While I'm making my presentation, please don't worry at any particular point of time. If you feel like saying something, just unmute yourself and speak up. You don't need anybody's permission. Because though I'm in the privileged position of the speaker, I will be speaking most of the time. I would like it to be more as interactive as possible. Right. So let me come to a couple of interesting facts about multilingualism to begin with. Uh, in the abstract of the session you came across earlier, I had said that multilingualism is a norm rather than deviation. Or in other words, we are multilingual by default and monolingualism is exception to the rule. So we should not be surprised to read about the fact that multilingual speakers outnumber monolingual speakers in the world's population. But one of the interesting and very important feature of multilingualism is even if people know multiple languages, their proficiency is not the same for all the languages they know. In other words, their competence is different for different set of languages. And that's why Vivian Cook suggests using multi-competence rather than multilingualism as, as a more appropriate term to discuss this phenomenon. For teachers of English that we are, this is an important aspect as I will come to a little later. Another interesting thing we must keep in mind is the relationship between literacy and multilingualism. It's not a straightforward relationship. We can't say that literate people are more multilingual and illiterate people are less. And to quote one very interesting example from the last Indian census, tribal people in India, most of the tribal population show very poor literacy level. But in terms of bilingualism or multilingualism, they are way above the national average. In other words, even if they are unable to read and write, they are multilingual to a great extent. One more interesting fact, and this is something that probably should inform our plans and decisions in the classroom. Bilingualism in particular is inversely proportional to the functional value of the mother tongue. In other words, how important the mother tongue is in a particular social cultural setup. That importance of mother tongue is inversely proportional to the bilingual nature of that person. So if someone has a mother tongue which is very important, then the likelihood of that person being bilingual is much less. So the more important the mother tongue, the less amount of bilingualism. Again, quoting one example from India, Hindi speakers with mother language as Hindi are seen to be the lowest in number among bilinguals. Their own mother tongue is so important, and that mother tongue caters to so many functions that they need to go to another language only for a few limited functions. On the other hand, people whose mother tongues are less important in the socio-political economic setup need to rely on other languages for their functionality. And that's why the number of bilinguals among them is much higher. And finally, it's very interesting to remind ourselves that even if we talk of multilingualism, multilingualism is not equally distributed across all the languages found within a country, found within a community, or found globally. In other words, if, as an imaginary example, if a nation has 100 languages, then it is very rare to see, it's very unlikely to see multilingualism covering all those 100 languages. So in reality, there are only a handful of languages which dominate the multilingual scene. Again, taking example from India, from the last census data, just looking at the bilingual people in India, English accounts for 26% of the bilinguals. So the bilingualism scenario in English in India is so heavily dominated by English. You compare this with the other figure. For other regional languages, all languages put together account for only 50% of that bilingualism. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. And when we say multilingualism or when we talk of language diversity, we are not actually talking about all languages spoken in a territory. Essentially, for practical purposes, the whole scenario is dominated by only a handful of languages. So coming to this notion of multilingualism, as I said, one of my concerns is to discuss the conceptualization of multilingualism. Someone, sorry about that disturbance. So multilingualism in a simplified way can be explained in so many different possible ways. It could mean individual people speaking multiple languages, as I believe many people in this room are. I believe you are all multilinguals and you can speak multiple languages. Multilingualism might mean a community where many languages are spoken. It could simply be a phenomenon of having many languages. So India is a multilingual country because there are so many languages spoken in the country. Another way of looking at a multilingual situation is the presence of speakers. Once again, this room. So this room can be multilingual in the first sense or in this latest sense also. Just people speaking different languages present in one space. Multilingualism may also mean doing something in many languages and sometimes doing it together. One simple example is the user manual that comes with any device, for example, with your mobile phone. And typically, that user manual is a multilingual manual because the instructions are given there in many languages. But a very simple, but at the same time quite useful way of summarizing that uh, overarching multilingual notion is Klein's way of putting it in the sense of three aspects. So multilingualism is summarized as the existence of more than one language in terms of language use. So when people or communities or nations or organizations use multiple languages, or language competence, when individuals know several languages, or language situation, when in a geographical space multiple languages are present. And any of these would refer to multilingualism. What often happens is we find a combination of two or all the three of these things together. But when we look at multilingualism in this sense, and these are the fairly common ways of understanding multilingualism, what are the issues in such conceptualization? The very fundamental issue is the notion of language itself. And I don't need to dwell much longer on this because this is much debated, much analyzed issue in social linguistics in general and in language diversity in particular. But to give one example, the last census data of India collected responses from the entire country's population and assimilated what people told about their languages. And the respondents reported more than 13,000 languages. But when the census report was prepared, those 13,000 languages were reduced to 400. And out of 400, a handful, I think about 120 were listed as separate languages, and the remaining 200 plus were just simply put together under one category called other. Now, why 13,000 languages, as reported by people, were reduced to 400? It clearly shows it clearly shows that the people who reported on the census data had one understanding of language. The analysts understood language in a different way, and often those differences are more political than linguistic. For us, the important issue is the very notion of language is problematic. Secondly, when we say that people are multilingual and they can speak or they know more than one languages, what does it mean to know a language, to speak a language? And again, like the notion of language, this is also a problematic and unresolved issue. In some cases, I referred to Vivian Cook earlier, and Vivian Cook takes a position that if you have a complete fluency, mastery in one language or two or three languages, only then you can call yourself a multilingual. While if you have limited, what he calls the tourist proficiency, where you can use a limited set of phrases when you go to a country as a tourist, that kind of competence, or a range of different levels of competence, then you can't call yourself multilingual, you can call yourself multi-competent. So here we see two very different notions of knowing or speaking a language. Then in countries like India, and I believe in many more countries as well, there are sets of people who do not very neatly, clearly fit into the, the present prevalent conceptualization of multilingualism. There are people who are oral multilinguals. In other words, they can speak and they do speak multiple languages, but they are literate in just one language. I'm sure you are familiar with hundreds of such people who can read and write in one language, but in speech, they can speak, they can communicate and quite fluently communicate in many more languages. Those kinds of people pose some challenge for the present conceptualization of multilingual. And another set of people is what we call simultaneous bilinguals. Uh, I consider myself as a simultaneous bilingual because I speak two languages, Marathi and Hindi. And I cannot honestly claim that one is my mother tongue because if, as far as I remember, I learned both of them together simultaneously on the streets, from the surrounding, even years before I started going to school as a child. I didn't learn them in the school, I learned them naturally and learned them together. There was no before or after. There are, I'm sure, thousands of people like me who pick up two, sometimes three, four languages naturally in their childhood. And it is difficult to distinguish between one language as mother language and the other languages they have picked up. Such people are simultaneous bilinguals. And for such people, when they go on picking up more languages later, sometimes through formal classroom teaching and lessons, then their multilingualism is a very mixed, complex kind of multilingualism. And that's why we also wonder whether there is only one kind of multilingualism or many, or whether there is one level of multilingualism or many. And please note that the points that you see on the screen, the things I'm listing here, these are still not clearly resolved issues in the notion of multilingualism. Another aspect that needs to be explored further, a lot of exploration is already happening in this case. But as I said earlier, multilingualism is limited to recognized languages. And I have deliberately put recognized in quotation marks because it's a contested, it's a debated term. Again, giving an example from India, the Indian constitution has a schedule of languages attached to it. Currently, there are 28 languages in that schedule, which are recognized languages. And many other languages are fighting to be included there. And the country's parliament can amend the constitution, pass the law, and include more languages. Now, why certain languages are included and not certain others? There is no uh, conclusive logic for that. And it seems that largely political reasons influenced those kinds of decisions. It is true that some languages are spoken by a vast number of people. So there is a huge chunk of population speaking those languages. But there are also languages spoken by minority populations, which are included, and some others which are also spoken by minority population but much larger in number and not included. So what we mean by recognized is also a debatable term. What I'm trying to suggest is a slightly different issue. When we talk of multilingualism or language diversity and start making list of languages which might come under that, then you will realize that our discussion is limited to the recognized, established, so-called standard languages. And other languages, even if they form part of multilingualism, are kept out of our consideration. And finally, another interesting phenomenon is the dialectal diversity. So if in a classroom, there are students speaking 4 languages. We assume that that is the nature of multilingualism in that classroom. So there are 4 languages present. But it often happens that if there are 10 students speaking one of those 4 languages, it's possible that those 10 students are not speaking the same dialect of that language. That is one kind of dialectal diversity. Another possibility is, in addition to 4 languages in that classroom, there could be people speaking very different dialects which are not recognized as languages. That's another kind of dialectal diversity. And in multilingualism, in our discussions, we often ignore this part of dialectal diversity. Uh, Here I remember one very interesting example experience actually. One of my research students came across when he was researching classroom interaction of English students at undergraduate level. And he found that in the English classroom, his students were very reluctant to speak in English or speak at all. And he was curious. He approached other teachers teaching their own mother tongue, because in Indian universities, mother tongues are also taught. He approached other teachers teaching their mother tongues and wanted them to find out whether the students were more talkative, more open in mother tongue classes and less in English, because possibly they were afraid of speaking in English. He interestingly found that even in the mother tongue classes, those students were not very active. They were largely silent. And when he met those students and interviewed them, tried to find out why this was so, they said something very interesting. In the English classroom, they were hesitant to speak in English because they were not confident of speaking in English. People would laugh at their English, they said. And in the mother tongue class, they hesitated to speak in their mother tongue because they spoke a particular dialect which so-called upper class literate people did not speak. And they were afraid that other classmates would laugh at their so-called poor dialect. So it's a similar phenomenon. And it's not just English language versus other languages. There are, within the same language, there are these dialectical plays as well, right? So if we come to conceptualizing multilingualism in the classroom, so far I was talking of general things. Specifically relating to the classroom, there are various ways in which multilingualism may be present in the classroom. So there could be speakers who speak many languages, essentially the teachers and the students. So that is one aspect of multilingualism. Then there could be different languages used in the classroom proceedings. And I'm specifically talking of the English classroom, where English, in addition to the local 2 or 3 languages, can be used for different functions, different purposes in the classroom. And in that classroom, there could be the presence of content, materials, resources in multiple languages. And it's usually found that multilingualism is present in all these aspects, typically in the English classroom. For us, the important question is, what does this mean for us as teachers? And we'll come to that question very soon. But let me show you some examples of classrooms in order to concretely visualize, try to visualize how multilingualism may be operating in a classroom. What you see on your screen is a typical primary classroom. Going by the age group, we can easily get this is a primary classroom. Imagine that this is an English class and there is the teacher of English standing at the back. Now here we can say that all the 3 aspects of multilingualism may be present. There are teachers and students speaking multiple languages, and possibly the teacher and the students are using different languages for different purposes during the classroom proceedings. For example, the teacher may be using English to read out the textual material, using a local language for explanation, and using a third language for instruction. That's possible. And thirdly, you can see lots of stuff lying on the desks of students, and those content, resources, materials may be in multiple languages. The textbook may be a bilingual textbook. So in a variety of ways, multilingualism may be present here. The question is, can we say in one general statement that this is a typically multilingual classroom? The answer would be yes and no. Yes, because yes, this is a multilingual classroom, but no, because it's difficult to choose or use one kind of multilingualism notion for a classroom. Because if you look at this classroom, and can we ask the same question again? Is this a multilingual classroom? And yes, it's most likely a multilingual classroom because multilingualism is a norm. And if you put 100 people together, there are very, very high chances that at least 3 or 4 languages are spoken in that group of 100 people. So this is a multilingual classroom. But multilingualism, as it obtains in this classroom, may be quite different from what you find here or here or here or here. So what we have seen are widely divergent, varied pictures of classrooms. And it is not just the age group, it's not just the composition in terms of males and females, it's not just the subject matter, but it's also the contexts which are very, very different for each of the classroom. The kind of institution, the kind of sociocultural context, the kind of languages present in the society or in that culture, the kind of teachers in the classroom, the kind of students in the classroom, all those things shape multilingualism so differently. The problem is we have been trying to address this diversity in so many different ways, in practical ways, finding solutions, finding techniques and strategies. But in terms of conceptualization, we are still struggling to put together a framework which can address this kind of diversity. So what happens is when we look at such a wide diversity of classrooms, we realize that actually, in spite of such diversity, we look at multilingualism with certain common set of assumptions. So we believe that multilingualism can be approached as a similar phenomenon everywhere. So we believe it's the same kind of multilingualism in all those classrooms. We believe that if a classroom has language diversity, then all the students are multilingual speakers. And if the speakers are multilingual, we also assume that they are competent, equally competent in all the languages they know. And we also assume that those speakers speak the standard variety of the language. And they bring the same kind of attitudes and aptitudes towards all the languages they know. There are several research studies which deal with these 3, 4 issues and point out that not all languages are competently used by a multilingual speaker. They have different levels of competencies. And it has also been found that people do not have same kind of attitude to all the languages they know. So if as a multilingual speaker, I know 6 languages, I may love 2 of them very much. I may be neutral about 2 more, and I may dislike the remaining 2, even if I'm using all of them. So what actually happens, and this I'm sharing on the basis of my own experience and experience of hundreds of teachers, which I was happy to come across, which they had shared with me. So these are some of the observations and I'm not claiming them to be based on evidence or research, but still they are very plausible and very realistic observations. And some of you might be interested in uh, conducting more research into this. So what I find, I believe, is even if a classroom is multilingual or not, every classroom has an operative language. Sometimes it can be one, or sometimes it could be two or three operative languages. And those operative languages are often hybrid of many languages. If you sit in a classroom and record the entire classroom session, you will find the entire interaction constantly shifting between languages. I'm talking of an English classroom. You will find teachers and students frequently switching from one language to another for various purposes. But often, this kind of switching and mixing is not seen as different languages, but it is seen as one common language, though it doesn't necessarily fit into the standard idea of language. But participants, the teachers and the students may understand this as one language. It's also commonly found that teachers use different languages for different purposes. Students also use different languages for different purposes within the same lesson. And still, they may not see this as a multilingual phenomenon. So when teachers and students are interacting constantly using different mix of languages, they may not be conscious of those different mix of languages. They seem to think of a monolingual interaction, right? Then when we think of this operative language in the classroom, we also need to be aware that multilingualism in the classroom is of two kinds. One, there is an operative multilingualism or diversity, and another is the actual diversity or multilingualism. Let me give you one example. As a class has 50 students, and together they all speak 15 languages. So that is the actual diversity of the class. There are 15 languages spoken in that classroom. That is the actual diversity. But for the purposes of the teaching learning process, the teacher and the students together use 3 or 4 languages only, the languages which are familiar to most of the people, the languages which are routinely used by the community, the languages which the teacher and students find convenient. So that diversity, the diversity of 4 languages, that is the operative diversity of the classroom. And it is useful to make that distinction so that when we make lesson plans, when we think of preparing materials, when we think of using language as resources, this is an important consideration that should inform us. This operative diversity, as I said, is decided by how many languages and which languages are functionally relevant to the teachers and the students. So in my example, even if there are 15 languages available in the classroom, all of them are not functionally appropriate, suitable, or comfortable for people. So only those which are relevant are used. And in this case, a very important distinction made by Jim Cummins in the basic interpersonal communication skills and cognitive academic language proficiency, the Bix and Kalp distinction is very useful here. So for the classroom interaction and general routine purposes and functionality, many more languages are used at the level of Bix. While for the academic purposes, only 1 or 2 languages are required at this level of academic language proficiency. To put it in simple words, in an English classroom, students would need cognitive, that is CALP, at the level of their, at the level of the proficiency to deal with their academic work in English. But they would quickly develop BICS in many more languages which are available in the classroom. So I'm aware of the time and I'm just skipping this to rush to some pedagogic concerns. Just let us try to imagine ourselves as teachers standing in front of a group of students who come with multiple languages in the classroom. And as teachers, we are told in our teacher trainings and teacher education program that we must take care of or take cognizance of this multilingualism. What does it mean for us as teachers? Let me begin with some general broader questions. The question of multilingualism and the medium of instruction. What should be the medium of instruction in a linguistically diverse classroom? And the typical usual answer is the mother tongue or the first language of the child. But as we become more and more aware of how the very notion of mother tongue or the first language of the child itself is problematic, we have now come across lots of different proposals and we use different terms. For example, mother tongue or the most enabled language or functional mother tongue or preferred language, home language, community language, etc. I'm just giving this list to point out the complex challenge in deciding a useful medium of instruction in any classroom which has language diversity. And once again, it's quite common and not unusual to find a classroom where, if you look at an individual student, the mother tongue, the home language, and the community language may be three different things. And the school might have a fourth language. So it's a very, very complicated situation. And the notion of language is often taken at the cost of the learner's languages. So learners' own languages are often downplayed when we talk of medium of instruction. And as Kosonen and Benson point out, there are dominant and non-dominant languages in any society, and they reflect partly what happens in the classroom. But within the classroom, again, some dominant and non-dominant languages crop up. So let me come to some specific concerns which teachers have. When we are told in our trainings and education programs that we should take multilingualism into account, do we really know how multilingualism is viewed by the teachers and the students? Because, as I said earlier, an outsider may look at a classroom interaction and say, okay, this is a multilingual interaction. People are using so many different languages. But then you talk to the teachers and the students, and they are not aware, they are not conscious of that. They only when you point out that they spoke partly in English and partly in another language or other two languages, only then they become aware. So for them, that's not multilingualism. Secondly, it's not still very clear in what ways multilingualism facilitates and in what ways it becomes an obstacle to the teaching and learning of English. And for us as teachers, what does it mean? You may come across lots of books which promise to tell you lots of strategies and techniques of dealing with multilingual classrooms. But we often feel a bit frustrated that many of those techniques do not seem to be relevant to our kind of multilingualism or diversity, because multilingualism is not same everywhere. So for teacher decisions, these are the crucial things which need to be explored further. In continuation of that, when there are multiple languages present in the classroom, a teacher has many practical questions for which often enough information is not available. So when a teacher is told to use multiple languages in the classroom as a resource, then there are practical questions like, are all languages equally competently spoken? Are all languages equally available for facilitation in a classroom? And if there are 15 languages in a classroom, should I, as a teacher, take into account all those languages? And if you say yes, how can I do that if I know only 3 of them? And is it possible that if the functional diversity of the classroom is reduced to only 2 or 3 languages, then they become the dominant or majority languages and others become minority languages? And if I have to use all languages as resources, how can I use that? And if I allow use of multiple languages, then who should use which language for what purposes? And for English teacher, this is often a critical question because we have heard lots of different theories. For example, I'm sure some of you might have heard this, that an English classroom should use only English. If at all another language is to be used, it's only the students who should use another language, but teacher should limit herself to English alone. And there is the opposite view that if another language is to be used, only teachers should use it. Students should not be allowed to use anything apart from English. So all those interesting things are there. But finally, I would like to just share something which may give us some idea in terms of a broad plan to address multilingualism in the classroom. It says that this multilingualism curriculum by Crum and Reich recommends that if we are teachers teaching a multilingual classroom, then we should develop these competencies. We should develop language awareness in general. We should have understanding of what languages mean, what their systems are, how they operate, etc. And we should be able to reflect on our own and other people's linguistic situation, and should have knowledge about languages and what languages mean culturally, socially, politically for people and for groups. We should also have at least some basic comparative understanding of different languages. If there are several languages spoken in our classrooms, at least for a few languages, we should have some comparative knowledge. And we should also try to acquire various learning strategies, and we should develop self-confidence about pupils' languages, students' language. That's a very interesting point. So if we are confident, we may not know our students' languages, but if they are being used in the classroom and we don't dismiss them, we take a positive approach towards them, we value them, it's an indication of self-confidence, and that is an important consideration in dealing with a multilingual classroom, right? So I think I will skip the discussion prompts because we are coming to the end, and I would uh, stop here, and I think if the moderator permits, we can open this for discussion. Thank you so much for being patient.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Amol. We appreciate
Sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
I really enjoyed your talk, and can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Great. So the floor is open for questions now. If you have any questions, you may put them in the chat. I was exploring your, the ideas from your talk that you talked about that even if we acknowledge a linguistic diversity, but if a classroom has more than two or three, four languages, then what about those? And the part from of Pakistan where I come from, Sindh, Sindhi is being taught in schools, and I see that Sindhi is again dominant languages and other languages that are being taught in Sindh province, they are ignored. Like there's a much of diversity, but then there's a question: how do you tackle this issue where linguistic diversity is seen as threat to one national language?
Uh, that's a very interesting question, and it is usually found that the actual diversity in any geographical space, whether it's a state or a region or a nation, that diversity is much richer than the officially claimed diversity. So if a state accepts three or four languages as recognized languages, the actual diversity is much larger. So the textbooks and the educational mediums and the examinations take into account those four languages, while every classroom is full of teachers and learners who speak many more languages. So in such a situation, For teachers, there is a double challenge. On the one hand, in everyday teaching scenario, they have to take into account those many languages in the classroom. While on the other hand, for the purposes of formal teaching, textbooks, materials, examination, they have to limit themselves to just 2 or 3 languages. So that complexity is there, and I don't think we have found a useful way out of this, because there are not only linguistic, but there are also logistic resources and funding issues. But I can see a couple of interesting questions in the chat box. So do you mind if I take them?
So
Amanullah, there are
this is
one
from
or two.
Bilal Rahimi.
Yeah,
Yep,
there is
we can
one
answer those.
question. Can I
What
take?
would
Sorry, there is one question on
sure,
translation method. Uh,
sure.
if I can take that first, and if you allow me to share the screen just for a moment. See, one of the prompts that I wanted to show is directly related to this. So Vidyarani Gaikwad has this question, how far is translation method useful or valid in a class? And this is something I wanted to share. I'm sorry, we ran out of time, and so I couldn't use. But if you look at this kind of prompt that I had used, until 1970s, translation tasks and activities were very common in English language courses and classrooms. And there used to be compulsory translation questions in exams. I'm talking of India. They are still common in other foreign language courses and classrooms, but they have completely disappeared from the English classrooms. And my take on this is a very unfortunate situation. Translation is an extremely powerful way of learning another language. And I'm not saying foreign language, I'm simply saying another language. There has been no other way than translation to begin learning a language. Later on, as our competence increases, we may depend less and less on translation at every step, but translation never completely disappears from our lives at any point of time. So even if someone is really a master, a native speaker like master in a language, that person cannot avoid translation. So translation is extremely useful. And I would personally very, very strongly recommend an active use of translation, because that is how multilingualism can be addressed, and that is how other languages can be used as a resource. Just a very simple, obvious example: when you ask someone to translate a few sentences from English to the mother tongue, or from the mother tongue to English, that very process makes the person aware of the comparative systems of the two languages, makes that person aware of similarities and differences in the systems, and then that person can use some of the understanding of mother tongue to understand another language. That's what we mean by using our mother tongues as resources. So absolutely, I would strongly recommend use of translation as a method. And sorry about that, Amanullah. The question for Bilal Rahimi is, what would be the positive and negative effects of multilingualism in English language classroom? Uh, I don't see necessarily any negative effects of multilingualism. The presence of multiple languages in an English classroom is not negative by default, nor positive by default. It is what it does, not what it is. So if there are several languages present in the classroom and the teacher either does not take them into account at all, which is good, you may find it controversial, which is good, or takes into account quite appropriately and in a relevant way, which is equally good, then multilingualism is a help. To give one example, if the teacher uses students' languages to explain a notion, to translate a few things, to give the meanings of words, then that's a help. If the teacher sticks to English alone, does not take the help of any language in the classroom, but at the same time uses lot many other strategies so that students understand, that's also a good way of teaching a foreign language. It's when languages are used, other languages like languages of the students are used as shortcuts by the teacher, as excuses, or as ways of saving trouble and efforts, both students and teachers' efforts, then they have negative effect on learning. So I hope I have managed to respond to your question, Bilal.
That's great. So also, if you could share your references slide. Someone asked me, if you can share your references.
Do you want me to show now? Yeah, I'll do so.
Yep, you can if you want.
Yeah, these are the references slide.
Yogida says, shall we use mother tongue to teach English language?
Why not? Why not? See, the simple, a simplistic, I would say, a simplistic logic is when you start learning a second language, you need the support of something you already know. So for a second language, you depend on the first language. For learning a third language, you depend on the first and the second language. Only expectation is increasingly your dependence on the previous languages decreases. So you use mother tongue to teach English. In the initial stages, mother tongue is used a lot. Increasingly, mother tongue is used less and less. And a time comes when the learner is quite proficient in English and everything can be managed in English. So that kind of trajectory is often claimed as a good way of teaching English.
All right. Thank you so very much for your time, Dr. Amol. We really appreciate your presence at the development webinars, especially on this eve of International Mother Language Day webinar series, and a lot of great ideas. And I apologize for all those technical glitches. Uh, we were hustling around here to fix everything, but then there are some internet issues and other issues on my side. So I'm sorry for that, but hopefully you know got insights of the talk. And this recording, if you are interested, will be available on Teacher Development Webinars YouTube channel, so you can rewatch and share with your colleagues and again review it. So yeah, for our future webinars, you can always join our social media channels. And so we are both time, so I'll be live striving. Please be safe and bye bye. Thank you so very much, Dr. Amal, once again.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks for this opportunity and wish you all the best.